Imagine the coldest night you've ever experienced. Maybe you shivered uncontrollably under a heap of blankets, or traced icy patterns on your window while wishing for even a flicker of heat. Now crank that up to an unimaginable extreme. A solid 3 months in a frozen wasteland, where the thermometer never climbs above -30 degrees F, with blizzard winds slicing through every crack. No cozy cabin, no roaring fireplace, no electric heater, not a single stick of wood to burn for warmth. Sounds impossible to survive, right? Yet this was everyday life for the Vikings, those fierce Scandinavian warriors and explorers famous for their longships and legendary raids. How on earth did the Vikings keep warm for 90 days straight, alone or with their families, when firewood was scarce or completely absent in the unforgiving tundra? No wood, no fire, and bone-chilling cold. It sounds like a riddle wrapped in a storm cloud, but believe it or not, they thrived. So how did they do it? This might be the strangest Viking survival trick you've never heard of. Instead of relying on the warmth of fire, the Vikings tapped into the secret power of their own bodies and the earth beneath them to generate, conserve, and trap heat like never before. Think of it as turning themselves into walking, breathing hot water bottles coated in natural insulation, so effective it would make modern-day bubble wrap jealous. Picture this. Instead of a crackling hearth, they wrapped their living spaces, and themselves, in layers that mimic the insulating properties of a 1,000-watt electric heater, but without a single watt of electricity. They designed homes and clothing so airtight and heat-retentive that their body heat alone kept entire families cozy, even when the snow blanketed everything outside. It's like they had discovered nature's version of Gore-Tex over 1,000 years ago. Let's break it down, starting with the house itself, a marvel of cold-weather architecture that seems downright futuristic today. Viking homes, or longhouses, were not just shelter, they were thermal fortresses. These long, narrow wooden halls might look plain from the outside, but inside, the Vikings were masters at seal-tight construction. They carefully chinked the gaps between logs with a combination of moss, mud, and animal hair, which acted as an ancient yet incredibly effective weatherproof sealant. This natural caulk slowed down heat loss by up to 80%, similar to modern double-pane windows. But here's the kicker. Wood was actually in very short supply during those brutal northern winters. Dense forests were miles away, and hauling fuel was nearly impossible in deep snow. So the Vikings had to get creative. Instead of burning wood all day, they collected dried animal dung and peat for fuel. But they burned those on a small, carefully controlled hearth designed to produce minimal smoke. Why? Because too much smoke meant more open airflow and heat rushing out the chimney, and losing precious internal warmth. Inside, the floor was often packed earth, and here is where the ground beneath the house became an unassuming hero. The Vikings knew how to trap geothermal warmth coming up from the earth's interior, even if it was slight, and combine it with body heat to keep the interior temperature surprisingly stable. Imagine their homes as giant heat sinks where human warmth and trapped earth energy created a cozy microclimate at just above freezing, sometimes reaching into the 40s or 50s Fahrenheit inside, even when it was -30 degrees F outside. That's like your basement staying toasty on a cold winter day without any heater plugged in. And it didn't stop there. Scientists today call this passive geothermal heating, a system we still use in modern green architecture. But for the Vikings, it was survival 101. They enhanced this by lining their homes with furs and skins so thick they functioned like years-old sleeping bags, which trapped heat and blocked drafts. Imagine rolling up in a layer of pelts equivalent to wrapping yourself in 3 to 4 inches of polar fleece. Basically, the medieval version of a thermal sleeping bag. Now, even with a house that was basically a heat-retaining fortress, warmth is nothing if it doesn't get to the body itself. And that's where clothing comes in. The Vikings wore layered wool garments under outer shells made of fatty animal skins. Think of them as wearable hot water bottles. Wool itself can retain heat even when damp and creates tiny pockets of air, trapping body heat just like the insulated lining of your favorite winter coat. Combined with leather layers treated with whale oil, these provided windproof and water-resistant properties. But get this, their diet wasn't just for survival. It was a critical part of their warmth strategy. They consumed a diet heavy in protein and fat, About 70–75% of their calories came from fatty fish, meat, and dairy. Why fat? Because metabolizing fat creates more internal heat, what scientists call diet-induced thermogenesis. It's like fueling a furnace inside your body, producing extra heat to stave off hypothermia. Today, endurance athletes and cold weather explorers use similar high-fat diets to maintain their core temperature under extreme conditions. You might be wondering about sleep because when the body is inactive, heat loss can spike. Vikings had sleeping arrangements that adapted ingeniously to this. They didn't simply collapse onto cold floors. Instead, they slept on raised platforms above the hearth, sometimes elevated 2 to 3 feet above ground level. This simple technique allowed them to benefit from heat rising, reducing heat loss by up to 50%. It was like having a built-in heated mattress without the electricity, and it also kept them safe from damp and pests. But all that warmth would vanish if their breath and sweat turned their homes into damp and freezing environments overnight. Vikings combated this by using natural ventilation, small, controlled openings that let out moist air but retained heat. It's a delicate balance. Too much ventilation equals heat out the chimney, too little equals condensation and cold. Think of it as early climate control. Even today's energy-efficient homes struggle with this balance. And it didn't stop there. The Vikings weren't just about passive methods. They incorporated active survival behavior useful for maintaining heat. They huddled together. Sharing body heat in confined spaces increases warmth exponentially. Imagine a group of 6 or more people packed closely, exchanging radiant heat, which can add the equivalent warmth of an additional 500 watts of heat output. A bit like standing close to multiple space heaters at once. But even with all these clever techniques, one of the biggest challenges remained: keeping snow and moisture out. Too much wetness could instantly sap warmth and lead to frostbite. To overcome this, Vikings heavily relied on layering their homes and clothing with oils and fats, specifically whale and seal oil. These oils acted as a water-repellent barrier, akin to modern waterproof coatings on high-tech winter gear. The oil didn't just keep water out. It created a vapor barrier that minimized moisture absorption. Think of it as an ancient natural Gore-Tex lining, but made from the very resources of their Arctic environment. What about social and psychological tactics? Vikings spent long winters telling stories, singing, and sharing meals inside this shared thermal sanctuary. Maintaining morale was a type of warmth too, because stress and fear can accelerate the onset of hypothermia. These communal rituals created a sense of safety and unity, which in turn stabilized their body's internal systems enough to survive those freezing dark months. So far, what feels like a mix of architecture, biology, chemistry, and social skill is really a masterclass of adaptation and innovation, sculpted over generations in response to one of the harshest environments on Earth. But there was one last hack that pushed their survival toolkit past anything we might expect. Before I get there, imagine standing outside a Viking longhouse in midwinter. The wind screams like a banshee, a fine cutting ice pelting your face and hands. You know that just beyond that heavy door lives a world of warmth, the secret warmth of the Earth, the heat of living bodies nestled together beneath layers of fat-treated skins and moss-lined walls. It might sound like a fairy tale, but this place was real, and the Vikings lived there every day for 3 months straight with zero wood. And guess what? There's still more. The next survival trick not only flipped their approach to cold on its head, but might just revolutionize how you think about staying warm too. Stick around because what they did next was downright genius. But here's where it gets truly wild. When the wood ran out completely, and remember, some Viking settlements were isolated for long stretches with no trees nearby, they turned the very thing that threatens cold victims into their secret weapon. They trapped their own breath. Sounds crazy, right? But think about it. Every exhale is a burst of warm, moist air. The Vikings were masters at recapturing that precious heat and recycling it inside their homes. They did this through something modern science now calls heat and moisture recovery ventilation. But over 1,000 years ago, Vikings nailed it without any technology. Picture their homes sealed so tightly that the warm breath they exhaled didn't escape into the icy void. It lingered inside, warming the air and increasing the humidity to comfortable levels, preventing the dry, frostbite-inducing chill. This was no accident. They built their homes with breathable membranes, layers of natural materials like tightly woven wool and animal skins treated with oil, so that moisture could pass through slowly without letting cold air flood in. This microscopic permeability acted like nature's own air exchanger. In today's world, this would be equivalent to a high-efficiency heat recovery ventilator, HRV, system used in modern passive houses, designed to recycle up to 85% of indoor heat that would otherwise be lost. The Vikings didn't have meters or sensors, just generations of trial, error, and a ruthless need to survive. It's staggering because this technique alone could maintain internal temperatures as high as 45 degrees F, while outside hovered near -30 degrees F, simply by trapping and reusing warm breath. And here's a sensory detail that brings this home. Imagine the air inside these longhouses wasn't icy and dry, but warm and slightly moist, carrying the faint smell of peat, smoke, and animal fur, with the soft murmur of voices and crackling peat fires adding life to the stillness. This moisture wasn't just comfort. It was critical because dry, cold air robs heat faster and dries out nasal passages, increasing the risk of frostbite and respiratory illness. Yet the Vikings carved out a bubble of warmth and humid air in the dead of a frozen Arctic winter. But all that warmth would vanish if they didn't conserve body heat with something else too: strategic movement and communal living. If you picture a lone Viking huddled in the cold, barely moving, shivering, they knew that would drain precious energy and heat fast. Instead, Vikings embraced a rhythm of constant, low-energy activity, mending gear, milking animals, weaving cloth, all indoors and closed together. This wasn't just busy work. Each subtle movement generated metabolic heat, with an average person producing around 100 watts just by sitting still and slightly more through light activity. Multiply that by a family of 8, and suddenly their bodies were a heat furnace generating nearly 1,000 watts collectively. That's the equivalent power of a space heater cranked on full blast for hours. Alongside this, their social structure reinforced a powerful survival hack. Shared warmth wasn't just physical, but emotional and psychological. Imagine family members sitting shoulder to shoulder on a fur-covered bench, hands busy crafting or sharing food, telling stories that cut through the long Arctic night like flickers of firelight. This closeness raised core body temperatures not just through direct heat transfer, but by lowering stress responses that otherwise consume energy and chill bodies. Today, research confirms that the feeling of psychological safety can actually improve circulation and heat retention. A Viking cuddle circle was literally life-saving. Now consider their diet again, high in fat and protein, but also supplemented with fermented foods rich in probiotics. Those tiny microbial allies didn't just improve digestion. They enhanced nutrient absorption and stabilized gut health, which is directly linked to energy efficiency and internal heat generation. Think of it as an early form of metabolic hacking, fuel efficiency turned way up to keep the engine burning bright. Modern cold weather soldiers use similar probiotic-rich diets to maintain endurance and heat production in freezing conditions. The Vikings' diet and lifestyle were intricately connected to their thermal survival, a holistic system rather than isolated tactics. Sleeping arrangements took this to a new level. Elevated sleeping platforms weren't just to stay dry and avoid pests. The height also helped trap rising warm air, creating a cozy heat zone that could be up to 20 degrees F warmer than ground level in these long, narrow houses. But more fascinating was their use of layered bedding made from reindeer hides and goose down, materials with incredible insulating properties. A 2-inch thick layer of goose down can reduce heat loss by nearly 80%. They stuffed their pillows and blankets with moss and feathers, creating natural insulation pockets that worked like medieval sleeping bags optimized for sub-zero temperatures. And here's a Viking trick modern campers envy. Before bedtime, they'd breathe into these layers to preheat the bedding. Imagine lying down on a frozen mattress and simply breathing warm air into your pillow and blanket, creating a cocoon of heat that stayed with you through the night. This heated bedding could keep a sleeper warm for hours, even when the room dropped below freezing. It's like having an invisible hot water bottle surrounding you, without ever needing a flame. But there was an even deeper secret embedded in their survival strategy, their spiritual connection to the land. Vikings believed the earth was alive, a body they could commune with and respect. This cultural reverence wasn't just superstition. It translated into sustainable practices that maintained the health of their environment, ensuring the tundra around them remained a source of warmth and food through moss, peat, and animals. They harvested these resources without depleting them, extending their survival capabilities season after season. This relationship led to their innovative use of geothermal spots, especially near volcanic areas in Iceland or geothermal springs in Norway. Vikings built some shelters over natural hot springs, a practice that's still used today in Icelandic homes. Imagine chunking your frozen body into such a warm sanctuary after a day in the snow, literally soaking in Earth's internal furnace. The geothermal heat kept these sites warm enough to grow early spring vegetables under turf roofs, extending their food calendar and preventing malnutrition, a killer in any extreme climate. All these survival layers, the airtight homes, the heat recycling breath, the fat-rich diet, the communal warmth, the specially crafted clothing and insulation, the spiritual ties to the earth, came together to form a system so robust that Vikings didn't merely survive. They thrived. For 90 days, sometimes even longer, they turned one of the harshest environments on Earth into a livable, warm home without a single log burned. So why does this matter today? Because beneath the myth of sword-wielding warriors lies a deep lesson in human ingenuity, adaptation, and resilience. In a time when we fret about fossil fuels and climate extremes, the Viking secret teaches us that sometimes solutions don't come from burning more, but from using less and smarter. They showed how body heat, natural materials, and the power of community could create warmth even when everything else was frozen solid. Imagine if we could adapt some of these old-school strategies: passive heating, heat recycling, and insulation using renewable materials in our own homes, reducing energy bills and carbon footprints. What if we nurtured a relationship with the environment so profound that survival meant going with the flow of Earth's power instead of fighting it? The Vikings didn't just survive winter, they mastered it on their own terms. In the end, every choice the Vikings made came from a fierce will to protect their families, their legacy, and their future. They transformed unyielding cold into a canvas for human creativity, turning scarcity into resourcefulness, isolation into togetherness. And that, perhaps, is the greatest warmth of all, not from fire or fuel, but from the unbreakable fire of human spirit. So next time you're bundled up, shivering at the sight of an empty fireplace, remember the Vikings, who with zero wood, zero electricity, and nothing but earth, breath, sweat, and love found a way to survive and thrive for 90 frozen days in some of the most brutal conditions on the planet. Their story doesn't just warm history books. It lights a path forward, reminding us that when we tap into nature, community, and innovation, no cold is too great to overcome.